I caught my wife plotting to kill me with my worst enemy. You won't believe what happened next. On Thursday, April 17, 2019, at 4:35 p.m., I finished my coffee inside the USC General Justice Building at Joint Base Guam. I checked my watch. The day had dragged on, and I was ready for it to end. After 3 hours of testifying and answering questions, I found myself in a small room, alone, with just a TV and my thoughts. I had been waiting for over 2 hours, wondering when the board would finally make a decision. The door opened, and Commander Tom Baker, my legal representative, stepped in. "The counsel's done for the day, Lieutenant Jones," he said. "That's me, Ethan Matthews, or Et to those close to me. I'm a senior flight lieutenant in the United States Space Corps, once known as the Space Force, which had been established almost 80 years ago. They want you back at 8 tomorrow, so head to your quarters," Commander Baker said. "And remember, don't talk to other witnesses, especially your wife." "You mean my soon-to-be ex-wife, the one who cheated?" I clarified. He nodded. "Exactly," he confirmed. "Now, Lieutenant, get going and stay out of trouble." "Aye, sir," I responded, stretching as I stood up. I grabbed my bag and left. I drove my compact electric car back to the BOQ, changed clothes, heated up a fake meat burger, and cracked open a beer. After a quick meal, I plopped down in my chair and turned on the TV, but found nothing worth watching. So, I lay back, my mind drifting back over the past few weeks. Up until recently, I was the weapons officer aboard the USS Armstrong, a top-of-the-line spacecraft named after a famous astronaut who landed on the moon. It carried a crew of 110 and was armed to the teeth. Nuclear missiles, energy weapons, railguns, and mini-lasers. The Armstrong's first trip to Jupiter was special because my wife, Tabitha, was the chief pilot. We'd been high school sweethearts, pledging loyalty to each other, both dreaming of exploring space. Though we were stationed at the same base, we often found ourselves apart on separate missions. When she was away, I focused on GravTac, a martial art designed for low-gravity environments, building both my strength and tactical abilities. I never had any reason to doubt her loyalty. I trusted her completely. The thought of her being unfaithful never even crossed my mind. I stayed committed to our relationship, despite the occasional temptation, never once imagining betrayal. We often dreamed of experiencing the zero-gravity environment of the Moon or Mars together. When we both got assigned to the Armstrong, it felt like those dreams were coming true. But what began as a dream quickly became a nightmare. I remember the day I left, Friday, January 3, 2019, at the Canaveral Launch Complex in Florida. I was in my flight suit, deep in thought as I boarded the shuttle bound for the Armstrong's orbital dock, along with 20 other crew members. Amy, as chief pilot, had already left hours before on an earlier shuttle. I was on the third one, with 3 more shuttles scheduled to follow. Beside me sat Commander Jason Victor, known as Chris Brooks due to his size and presence. I recognized him from our academy days. He had been Amy's instructor, and a tough one at that. Though I knew him, we'd barely spoken, just a few classes together. "Excited to serve with your wife, Jones?" Chris Brooks asked. "Yes, sir, I am," I replied. "This will be a historic mission," he remarked. "Heading farther than ever," I responded. "Jupiter and back in less than 100 days. Quite the mission," he added. The shuttle's engines hummed, signaling our departure. Chris Brooks checked to make sure everyone was ready. "Time to say goodbye to Earth." "That's it. Let it go," he said gruffly, settling back in his seat. With visors down, we prepared for liftoff. The rockets roared to life, and the force of gravity pushed against us. I watched through the window as clouds rushed by, and the sky darkened, revealing the curve of the Earth below. The shuttle shuddered as the boosters detached, headed back to our launch site. After an hour, Chris Brooks spoke up. "There she is," he said, lifting his visor. "Docking soon." 30 minutes later, we approached the open dock. They matched its speed, and 2 tubular structures extended, connecting, with a hiss as pressure equalized. "We're here," Chris Brooks said. Prepare for some gravity. Ship's at 0.8 G. The Armstrong's gravity system was adjustable, so I knew it would ease the effects of weightlessness, fluid shifts, and muscle atrophy. As the crew signaled, a green light flashed above the hatches. Chris Brooks stood and motioned for everyone to follow. I unbuckled my seatbelt, grabbed my bag, and adjusted to the ship's low gravity. From the shuttle's near zero-gravity environment to the ship's mild pull, I felt the weight of my gear immediately. 4 hours until station launch, folks, Chris Brooks said. Let's get moving. 3 more shuttles are right behind us. I knew where our cabin was, so I headed there first, hoping to find Amy. Though she wasn't there, her things filled half the closet, a sign she had already arrived. I stowed my gear, changed out of my spacesuit into my flight suit, grabbed my uniform cap, and headed to the bridge to take my place at the weapons console. The bridge was buzzing with activity. I ran calibration checks and reviewed weapon inventories, making sure everything, crew, missile platforms, and weapons, was secure. I prepared a report for Captain Alan Simmons, a man I knew from our time on the Shepherd. After the medic left, I submitted my inventory. He signed it, and we verified our key codes. Only 3 people had the codes to launch the cruise missiles: the captain, the first officer, and me. It took 2 keys to fire them. "Good to have you with us, Jones," Captain Simmons said. "I hear you're married to our chief pilot, Amy." I smiled. "Yes, sir," I said. "Great," Captain Simmons responded. "Shouldn't make the trip more interesting for you." "Yes, sir, I hope so," I replied, glancing at Amy. She smiled mischievously before getting back to work. Chris Brooks walked in, surveying everything. 2. His cold, unwavering gaze signaled it was time for me to return to my station. "Better get back to my post, sir," I said. Alan gave a brief nod and moved on. I returned to my station, double-checking that all the calibration tasks were completed. Everything was running perfectly. Given Captain Simmons' tendency for unannounced weapons drills from our time on the Shepherd, I made sure the weapons were always ready and the targeting system was fully calibrated. Each shift began with a calibration check to ensure system accuracy unless a malfunction occurred. Finally, Alan began the relaunch checklist as we strapped ourselves in. "Operative," he called out. "All systems ready for launch," responded Lieutenant S. from engineering. "All systems normal," Alan confirmed. "Proceed to launch," instructed Chief Engineer Lieutenant Sam. "Weapons?" "All systems calibrated and weapons accounted for," I replied. "Comms?" "Communications 5x5, sir," said Lieutenant Denise Simpson. "Navigation. Course plotted and locked. ETA at Mars Station is 440 hours, reported Lieutenant Ryan. "HACECOM number 1. L personnel in place and ready for launch," Chris Brooks said, his voice steady. Alan nodded and pressed a button on the console. "Houston, this is Armstrong requesting permission to launch," he said. "Launch authorization granted, Armstrong. Godspeed," came the reply. "Roger that, Houston," Alan responded, then added, "Spake, this is Armstrong. Retract all lines." "Copy that, Armstrong. Lines retracting," came the confirmation, followed by a series of sharp sounds as the lines were withdrawn. Moments later, we received confirmation that all lines were retracted. "Start the engines," Alan ordered. "My mic and hands for disembarking," I said. "Engines running," Ryan confirmed. "Take us out, helmsman. Nice and easy. Don't scratch the paint," Alan said with a grin. "Aye, sir," Amy replied, pulling 2 levers and grasping the control column. The ship began to move forward slowly, edging toward the spaceport exit. We used maneuvering thrusters, knowing firing the ion fusion plasma thrusters in the dock would damage both the station and the Armstrong. Soon, we cleared the structure. "The space door is ready," Amy said. "We'll spiral out of Earth orbit to a point between Earth and the Moon, then fire up the big engines." "That's the Q spot," she explained. I could see the tracking on the navigator's console. An hour later, the navigator spoke. "ETA at Q point is 2 microns, sir. The road is clear." This meant there were no obstacles or debris detected in the path ahead. "Copy that," Alan replied. "Engineering?" "Engines warmed up and ready, sir," Brian confirmed. All in radioed Houston. "Armstrong approaching point Q." Approaching cue point. Copy that, Armstrong, came the response. Watched the countdown timers, preparing for the launch. At 0, Allen said. Pump up the tires and light a fire, helmsman. Let's see what this girl can do. Amy's hands danced over the console, kicking tires, starting fires. Aye, sir, she said, sliding the control levers forward. As the engines roared to life, the acceleration hit us like a punch, the hum of the ship intensifying with each surge of G-force. We shot forward at speeds beyond anything I had ever felt. I glanced at Amy, filled with pride, offering a smile, a wink, and a thumbs up. She returned my smile before looking over at Chris Brooks. Sensing Chris Brooks's growing tension, I refocused on my console. About an hour later, a sense of unease began to creep in. It wasn't surprising to see Chris Brooks posting the officer's schedule on the bridge, but seeing myself assigned to the second shift raised my hackles. In space, time followed Houston's schedule, with lights dimming to simulate nighttime for the second shift. While not a formal rule, senior officers typically took the first shift. Seeing Chris Brooks placed me on the second shift felt like a demotion, especially since Amy would be on the first shift. This left us little time together, and if we were lucky, we might catch a brief moment during shift changes. To say I was upset was an understatement, and Chris Brooks knew it. Is there a scheduling issue, Lieutenant? Chris Brooks asked, his voice cutting through the silence. I looked up to see him standing in front of my console. Rebecca Morgan had walked over too, having seen the schedule and now curious about his response. Am I still the senior weapons officer, sir? I asked, trying to keep my tone neutral. Of course you are, Chris Brooks replied, without hesitation. Then why am I on the second shift? I pressed, frustration creeping into my voice. I believe it's the best arrangement for you, he answered, drawing attention from those around. If you have concerns about the schedule, take it up with the captain, through me. At that moment, Allen approached. Is there an issue, gentlemen? He asked. Lieutenant Jones doesn't like the bridge schedule, sir, Chris Brooks said, his voice smooth as if trying to downplay the situation. Helen looked at the schedule and frowned. I can see why he might feel that way, number one, Allen said, a hint of sympathy in his tone. It's definitely an unusual setup, wouldn't you agree? Yes, sir, Chris Brooks replied. Normally I would, but I think Lieutenant Jones's expertise is best suited for the second shift. This also allows us to train other gunnery officers on the first shift. Something in Chris Brooks's words didn't sit right with me. My suspicion radar was going off. Is that really the only reason, Commander, or is there more to it? Allen asked, his voice laced with skepticism. If I may speak freely, sir, Chris Brooks said, in a quiet, almost hesitant tone. Always number one, Allen replied, giving him permission to speak candidly. I've never been comfortable with spouses working on the same ship, especially in such close quarters, Chris Brooks continued. I don't want them distracted from their duties. Later responded as he looked back at the old scientist warily. Oh, Allen said, nodding as he processed the information. I understand your concern, but I won't allow this to affect their morale. Make sure they still find time to be together, understood? Yes, sir, Chris Brooks said, his tone now more resigned. Allen turned to me. Can you manage that, Lieutenant? Yes, sir, I replied stiffly. Good. Carry on. Allen said, dismissing us both as he walked away. Chris Brooks shot me a smug look. Don't worry, Jones. I'll keep an eye on your wife, he said with a smirk before leaving. I turned to Alice, who put a finger to her lips, signaling for silence. Don't say anything, At, she said softly. We'll talk later. I'll call Lieutenant Robinson. Yes, ma'am, I muttered quietly, feeling the weight of the conversation settle in. I glanced at Amy, who was focused on her console, her face flushed. I couldn't tell if it was from embarrassment or guilt, but something about her demeanor felt off. I left the bridge, feeling more humiliated than I had ever been. When I returned myself, everyone had moved on. Thankfully, we did the same thing at the experimental. Something was definitely wrong. Needing to clear my head, I made my way to the galley. It wasn't a typical mealtime, so I knew the options would be limited. "Not much to choose from right now, Lieutenant," the man behind the plexiglass partition said with a shrug. "We've got artificial meat hamburgers. They taste awful, but they'll fill you up." "That'll do," I said, not caring much about the taste at this point. He handed me the burger on a tray and tossed a packet of flavored ketchup onto it. "Want some axle grease to make it better?" he asked with a grin. "Sure, why not?" I replied, taking the packet. But before making it, I looked at my watch and saw that it was after 8 o'clock on the morning I was expected. "Thanks." "Any time, Lieutenant," he said with a nod. I grabbed a small bottle of chocolate milk and found a vacant table. I ate the burger, drenched it in ketchup, and chugged the milk. It was horrible, but it filled me up, and the ketchup at least made it tolerable. When I'd been looking blankly at the menu for a while, after finishing, I disposed of my tray and trash before heading back to my quarters. I lay down, hoping to sleep, but my mind kept circling back to Chris Brooks. What did he mean by keeping an eye on Amy? An hour of tossing and turning passed before I gave up. Frustrated, I threw on my workout clothes and headed for the small gym on one of the lower decks. When I arrived, I was relieved to find it empty. Good, I thought to myself. I can vent without anyone around. I stretched, ran on the treadmill, worked with the weight machine, and then adjusted the gravity to 0.4 G. Feeling lighter, I practiced some GravTac techniques for about half an hour. By the time I finished, I was sweating and finally felt ready for sleep. I reset the gravity and returned to my quarters. After a quick shower in the cramped bathroom, I set my alarm and collapsed into bed, falling asleep instantly. When the alarm went off, I got up, showered again, shaved, dressed, and headed to the galley for a snack. It was a significant improvement over the synthetic meat burger I had earlier. I arrived on the bridge just as Amy was leaving. "Hello, stranger," I said with a smile. "Hi," she replied. "I didn't get a chance to tell you earlier, but you did a great job with the launch," I said, genuinely impressed. "Thank you," she said, her face lighting up with appreciation. "Maybe I'll come by during my lunch break and we can spend some time together," I suggested, hopeful. I could see her processing the idea, probably expecting me to make an excuse, but thankfully she didn't. "Sure, I'll set the alarm," she said with a wink. "Maybe you can have me instead of one of those fake burgers?" "Works for me," I said, grinning. "I'll see you in 6 hours." "I'll be there," she said, giving me a quick kiss. I love you too," I replied, feeling a spark of hope. I watched her walk away, wondering if we could make it work, then turned and saw Chris Brooks grinning at me from across the bridge. "About damn time you showed up, Jones," he said, his smirk almost too wide. I glanced at my watch. "My shift doesn't start for another 15 minutes, Commander," I said. "I just wanted to talk to my wife before duty, if that's all right with you, sir." I half expected him to lash out, but instead he relaxed. "Yeah, all right," he said and turned, walking down the corridor. I stepped onto the bridge and took over from Lieutenant Robinson, who handed me the shift and left. As I started the calibration, Rebecca Morgan walked over. "How are you holding up?" she asked, her voice soft with concern. "I'll be fine, Alice," I said, trying to sound reassuring. "Seriously, how are you doing?" she pressed, her gaze steady. "It's not easy, but I can handle it. Thanks for asking," I replied. "You're welcome. Listen, I know you've got a lot on your mind, but I think you need to keep an eye on your wife and Commander Victor," she said, her tone serious. I looked at her, shocked. "Do you think there's something going on between them?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "Maybe," Rebecca Morgan said, her voice tinged with intuition. "Call it female intuition, but I've noticed little glances between them. Nothing overt, but there's definitely something there." "Got it, Alice. Thanks for the heads up," I said, trying to process the information. "I'm meeting her on my lunch break. Hopefully that helps." "I hope so too, Et," she said softly. "Should we tell the captain?" I asked, unsure of what to do next. Rebecca Morgan sucked her head. Not unless you've got solid proof. Accusing a senior officer without evidence can backfire, and it'll hurt your career. Just stay alert and keep an eye on your wife." "I'll watch during the first shift," she advised. "Okay, Alice, thanks." She nodded and left the bridge. I double-checked the calibration and scanned the missile stations before returning to my console. Just then, Alan appeared. "Interested in some target practice?" he asked, his eyes bright with interest. "Sure thing," I agreed, glad for the distraction. "All right, launch some drones," he instructed. I set up 5 drones and activated the mini lasers. They were like old-fashioned miniguns, but with intense heat, the lasers quickly shredded the drones into pieces. "Well done, Lieutenant," Alan praised. "Thanks, sir," I said, feeling a small sense of pride. He gestured toward the central chair. "Take the center chair, Lieutenant, as the senior officer on watch while I rest." "Yes, sir, thank you," I replied, knowing he was a fan of taking power naps when he could. He left the bridge, and I took over his spot. Sitting in the command chair, I felt a surge of control, watching the ship's operations unfold. Each crew member wore a wrist device that tracked time, communication, vital signs, and more. Except during showers. Using the tracking monitor, I located Victor in his quarters. His pulse remained steady, confirming he was wearing the device. I then checked for Jones, but there were 2 Williams listed, myself and Tabitha. I focused on Tabitha's beacon in our quarters. It mirrored Victor's status. Both were asleep, with normal vital signs. Though I was tempted to review their tracker history, I couldn't as I lacked the necessary credentials. Convinced of their involvement, I deactivated the tracking monitor and returned to my duties. The bridge seemed busy, with everyone attending to their tasks, unaware of my quiet observations. I double-checked the checklist, ensuring everything was running smoothly. "I coughed as the visibility behind me began to tingle. In about an hour, there would be a scheduled course adjustment already programmed into the navigation system. The communications officer stayed in contact with Houston's flight control, so I didn't need to get involved unless the captain was required for immediate action. The engineer on duty kept an eye on the engines, while the helmsman and navigator ensured the flight was smooth, especially with the upcoming course correction. After logging the hour's activities, I quickly inspected the weapons console before returning to the central chair. About 2 hours into the shift, Petty Officer Marks took drink orders from everyone, bringing us beverages with covers and straws at our stations. After a brief absence, she returned with drinks for the whole bridge crew. Shortly before my lunch break, Alan returned and sat down. I briefed him on the ship's progress, and he acknowledged my report, making notes in his journal. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said, a subtle wink accompanying his gesture to send me on my break. I promptly, "Yes, sir," I said, stepping away from my station. On my way to our shared quarters, I paused at the hatch, taking a moment to gather myself before entering. Amy had just woken up to the alarm and was preparing for dinner. With a teasing smile, she asked, "Ready?" I joined her on the bed. "Definitely," I replied, as we shared a tender and intimate moment. Afterward, she sighed. "Just what I needed." "You have been very good, Murray," I told her, a smile at my work. "I agreed," I said. "I missed you," I admitted. "I missed you too. I love you so much," she responded. "I love you too," I replied. Glancing at the time, she reminded me, "We should clean up and get back." There were about 40 minutes left in my break. "You're right," I said. "How about round 2 on your lunch break?" she suggested with a smile. "Definitely," I agreed, feeling a little better. I got up, took a quick shower, and headed to the galley. Before leaving, I kissed her, adjusted the lights, and set the gravity to 0.7 GS, knowing how important gravity settings were for our performance. Something Chris Brooks didn't understand. Sex in space isn't as romantic as movies make it out to be. In microgravity, blood tends to rush to your head, not your lower body. Thankfully, with the ship's gravity set at 0.8 G, we could still enjoy ourselves, though it wasn't easy. Lower gravity might have made it impossible. Testosterone levels decrease in microgravity, which can affect heart size and blood volume. These factors, along with the risk of pregnancy, once led NASA to ban couples from space missions. However, rumors about Kuzmina's romantic encounters on the Russian Mir station in the 1990s have persisted. Despite initial denials, the Kuzmina later confessed to feeling natural desires, but played them down. He even mentioned a superior's advice to bring an inflatable doll to avoid attachments. Although some old restrictions remained, advances like artificial gravity in the early 2000s eliminated many concerns. Consequently, the rules relaxed, allowing married couples to engage in intimate moments in space under certain conditions. After a satisfying tuna sandwich, I returned to the bridge with just 2 minutes to spare. Alan greeted me and asked how my lunch was. I settled into my console, ready to begin the shift. Over the next 17 days, Amy often visited during my lunch breaks, offering comfort and companionship. There was minimal interaction with Chris Brooks, which helped ease my concerns. Rebecca Morgan kept me updated, and there was no suspicious activity to report. When we docked at Mars Station, I prepared for a shore leave with Amy at Hans Base. However, Chris Brooks interrupted my plans with news of an issue with one of the weapons stations. "What's going on?" I asked, surprised. Just hours earlier, I had checked the systems and everything was fine. I turned to Lieutenant Robinson, who confirmed the problem occurred just before docking. Suspicious, I was determined to investigate. "We've got 72 hours here," Chris Brooks reminded me. "Make sure those weapons are ready before launch." Disappointed, I glanced at Amy. "It'll be okay," she reassured me. "We'll still visit Hagen's. I'll bring you back a souvenir." "All right," Chris Brooks smirked. "Don't worry, Jones, I'll keep an eye on your wife," he said. "Yeah, I'm sure you will," I thought to myself. Alan approached, ready for some beach time. "What's going on?" he asked. Chris Brooks replied, "Jones needs to check the weapons systems." Robinson explained the calibration issue with the mini lasers. Alan turned to me. "Better take a look, Lieutenant," he said. "I'll join you." "Thanks, sir," I replied. "I appreciate it. I'll handle it," Lieutenant Robinson offered. "Much appreciated," I said. "Let's check the station before the shuttles leave," Chris Brooks urged. Amy looked at me quietly, and I turned to Alice. "Something's not right, Ed," she whispered. "I'll keep watch." "Thanks," I replied. She smiled and walked away. "I'll change into my work clothes," I said. "Which lasers are the issue?" I asked Robinson. "Number 2 and number 5, sir," he reported. "I'll handle 2. You check 5, but we'll inspect all of them," I instructed. "Understood, sir," he said. "I'll meet you at Laser Station 2, I added. "I'll be there soon," he replied. I grabbed my tools and left the bridge. A few minutes later, Alan caught up with me, now in his work uniform. "What's the situation?" he asked. "I'm just about to remove the control box cover," I replied, beginning to unscrew it. Upon inspection, I discovered the issue, a broken gear in the drive system and a missing E-clip. "Uh-oh," I muttered. "Someone tampered with this," I explained. "Something that would take a long period of time to fix, which is a similar risk to a diabetes patient," Leah said. "Someone tampered with this," I explained. "The E-clip's gone, and the drive gear is damaged." "Could this affect the weapons?" Alan wondered. "Absolutely," I confirmed. "If the lasers were active, this could have pierced the hull." "How did this happen?" he asked. "It seems deliberate," I said. "These systems are sealed and require specific tools to access," I added, showing him the tool. "Can it be fixed?" Alan asked. "Yes, but it'll take time," I replied. "Around 8 to 10 hours, assuming no more problems arise." "Wow," he remarked. "Need help?" I appreciated his offer, but I was on my own for this one. "No, sir, I can manage, but thanks," I said. "There's only room for one set of hands." Just then Robinson contacted me. "Boss, the E-clip's broken, and the drive gears are damaged," he reported. I turned to Alan. "We'll need to replace the entire control box," I said. "Agreed," Alan nodded. "Proceed and get the armory to check all the weapons." "Understood," Robinson replied. "What are the chances of 2 control units failing simultaneously?" Alan asked. "Highly unlikely," I answered. "These units are very reliable. I've never seen one malfunction, let alone 2. They're among the most stable in our inventory. Could it be a manufacturing defect? He suggested. Doubtful, sir, I replied. These units go through extensive testing before installation. In all my experience, I've never seen a failure like this. I need to inform Houston, Alan decided. Let's bring in engineers from Mars Station and postpone a full Level 5 diagnostic. It's absurd that a $1 trillion ship is being held up by a cheap E-clip. Keep me updated, I instructed. Yes, sir, Alan affirmed. After he left, I continued my examination. Upon removing the control box, I noticed a dark stain on the interior hull. It wasn't transmission grease. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be blood. It seemed the Sabur had injured themselves during the process. I retrieved tweezers from the toolbox, collected a sample, and sealed it in a small bag. Meanwhile, an armorer replaced the faulty control box. Despite focusing on the task, disturbing thoughts lingered in my mind. Chris Brooks seemed intent on separating Amy and me, changing schedules, and now this sabotage. His assurances about looking after Amy only fueled my suspicions. The thought of her being involved with him sickened me. Chris Brooks had been her counselor at the academy, and they had served together before. Had something been going on between them the whole time? Once the installation was completed and a dry test run performed, I logged the maintenance and regretted the 10 hours lost that should have been spent with Amy. Reviewing the log, I found no clues. Robinson confirmed the new unit was installed and there were no other issues. Though it would disrupt his shore leave, I instructed Robinson to conduct a full inspection of all weapon systems and missiles. He agreed and got to work. On my way to the bridge, I stopped by S-Bay to speak with the on-duty corpsman. "How's it going, Lieutenant Jones?" she asked. "Would you be able to run a DNA test?" I asked. "We have the equipment, but it needs to be verified by a certified lab," she explained. I handed her the sample. "I need to know whose blood this is," I said. "Can you do that?" "Sure," she replied. "It will take a few hours and we'll need to compare it to existing records." What happened was still too fresh to talk about, except for the fact that she was already 6 months pregnant and trying to navigate the hospital rounds she traveled all alone. "I can't discuss it right now, Chief," I replied. She agreed to look into it and promised to inform me of any findings. "Thanks, Chief. I appreciate it," I said. "You're welcome, sir," she responded with a smile. She was undeniably attractive, and for a brief moment I found myself wondering how she might look without her uniform. But the thought was fleeting. Soon after, I made my way to the bridge to report in. Alan was standing at the hatch to his ready room when I arrived. "Got it fixed?" he asked. "Yes, sir," I replied. "Lieutenant Robinson is currently running checks on the remaining systems." "Good," he said. Come inside, please." He entered and saw Rebecca Morgan and Commander Carson, the ship's head of security, already in the room. Rebecca Morgan closed the hatch behind me and took a seat. "Thanks for coming so quickly," Alan said to Rebecca Morgan and Commander Carson. "We have a situation. There's a saboteur aboard." 2 of the weapon systems were tampered with before we reached Mars Station, Alan continued. "Command wants us to start the investigation right away, and I'm to coordinate with the Core Criminal Investigations Division on Haggins. They won't arrive for at least 36 hours, so that gives us time to gather all the information we can. I'm giving both of you temporary access to the entire track history. I need to know who had access to the weapon systems as soon as possible. This investigation needs to be thorough, but discreet. We can't have the crew getting wind of it," he emphasized. "Understood, sir," Commander Carson responded. Meanwhile, a team of Mars engineers is conducting full Level 5 diagnostics on the ship. It will take about 72 hours. Command doesn't want us leaving with a potential saboteur on board, and I agree. The mission might be cancelled, Alan explained. "Any questions?" "Just one, sir," I interjected, catching everyone's attention. "Yes, Lieutenant?" Alan prompted. "I found blood on the replacement control box housing," I said. "I've sent a sample to Sick Bay for DNA analysis." "Good thinking," Alan said. "I'll check with Chief Benson on that." "Anything else?" We shook our heads. "Ready." All right, you have your tasks, Alan concluded. Dismissed. Yes, sir, Commander Carson said. I left the ready room and set my tool bag down on the weapons console as I prepared to leave the bridge. Rebecca Morgan called out to me. Ma'am, she said. Yes, I responded. I've been monitoring Amy and Commander Victor, she said, showing me her phone with pictures. Without it, shocked, I saw images of Amy and Chris Brooks entering a club, holding hands, dancing, drinking, and engaging in intimate behavior. Then Rebecca Morgan showed me pictures of them entering a hotel, implying their intentions were clear. I'm sorry, Ed, Rebecca Morgan said quietly. I thought you needed to know. Thank you, Alice, I replied, struggling to keep my emotions in check. Will you be telling the captain? She asked. I'll have to report it, I said. But I appreciate you letting me know first. I left the bridge and caught up with Robinson. We finished the remaining system checks and completed the inventory. My shift ended, and I grabbed a quick snack in the galley before heading back to my quarters, hoping to rest. But the thoughts of Amy and Chris Brooks kept me awake for a while. Eventually, I managed to fall asleep. When I woke up, I showered, dressed, and was about to leave when Amy entered the cabin. She looked refreshed, her glow unmistakable. A part of me burned with anger. Did you have fun? I asked, keeping my voice calm. Yes, we did, she answered. We just got back. Sorry you couldn't join us. Maybe next time. I didn't respond, just watched her. What were the engineers doing on the station? She asked. Routine maintenance, I replied. And what's your plan now? She asked. I'm going to rest for a bit, I said. I'm off duty for the next 12 hours. Are you starting your ship now? She asked. Yes, I answered. Did you get everything fixed? I think so, I said. Good, she replied. I missed you out there. Really? That's not what I heard, I said. What do you mean? She asked. I heard you and Chris Brooks had a lot of fun, I said. Anything you want to tell me? We danced, had a few drinks, but that's it, she replied, looking defensive. Nothing else, I pressed. Of course not, she said, feigning surprise. Why would you think that? Nothing, I said, feigning surprise. Need to get to work. As I reached the door, Amy stopped me. She leaned in to kiss me, but I turned my head just in time, feeling her lips brush my cheek. Ed, I love you, she said. What's wrong? She asked. You tell me, I said, walking out without waiting for a reply. I was left wondering about the woman I thought I knew. Did she really believe she could be with someone else and then come back to me, expecting no consequences? Did she think I wouldn't see through her lies? When I got to my station, I noticed Chris Brooks wasn't around. I continued with my diagnostics, but about 7 hours later I realized I hadn't eaten. I decided to go to our quarters to grab something and talk things over with Amy. But when I opened the hatch, I was confronted with the sight no husband should ever see. Amy and Chris Brooks were on our bed. I noticed the gravity had been increased to 0.9 G, and I already felt better. They both looked at me, and Amy quickly pulled away. Chris Brooks, with a smirk, told me to shut the hatch, asking why I was there. As he got dressed, he mocked me, questioning if I had ever learned how to make love. After putting on his flight suit, he suggested we go for a walk and said he'd return to talk to Amy. As I turned to leave, he made me smirk at him a little too hard with what might be his last grand dream of someday connecting interstellar travel again. Amy looked at me with regret. I'm sorry, Ed, she whispered. We'll talk later, Chris Brooks said, dismissing my question and motioning for me to follow him. I sensed trouble, so I activated the video recording function on my suit. It was equipped with cameras for situations like this. I wanted to document this encounter, unsure of what would happen next. As we walked, Chris Brooks praised the change I'd made to the gravity settings in our quarters. He said he had noticed the adjustment shortly after my arrival. When I asked him how long he had known, he corrected me with a smirk, then continued talking. He began recounting his history with Amy, mentioning that he had been her counselor at the academy. He claimed she had sought his help with a personal issue, and he insinuated that she had fallen for his charms. He laughed at his own remarks, thinking he was clever. I was furious, but kept my cool, knowing that violence wouldn't help. "So you're always there for her, huh?" I asked. "Absolutely, Lieutenant," he said. "You're good at investigating, aren't you? Was that why you changed the bridge schedule?" "You caught on, Jones," he admitted. "And the weapon system sabotage?" I pressed. "Between us," he said. "Yes, air quoting investigation. What's next?" I asked. "Planning to hurt me?" he chuckled, leading us into the elevator. "Certainly not, Lieutenant," he assured. "Would I really take out an officer for just a fling?" "Not yet," I replied. He led me out of the elevator and insisted I was mistaken. According to his recent investigation, he had concluded that I had discovered my wife's infidelity, become distraught, sabotaged the weapon systems to frame her lover, and was planning to take my own life when she left me. We stopped at the starboard airlock where the inner hatch was open and the spacesuits had been removed. Chris Brooks held a pistol in his hand. "You figured it all out, huh?" I challenged him. "Absolutely," he said with a smirk. "Now into the airlock." "You won't succeed," I said, trying to stay calm. Chris Brooks scoffed. "Who would believe you, a failing husband, or me, a seasoned officer?" he retorted. I took note of the gravity set at 0.8 G. It wasn't ideal, but I could work with it. Seizing the opportunity, I jumped up, struck him twice, and locked him inside the airlock. "Squad Commander," I said as he shouted at me to open the door. "What did Tabitha know?" "Your plan, of course," he replied, his expression smug. "It was her idea. Now, open the door." "I'm not saying more," he warned, aiming his weapon at me. "Do it." I looked at the controls and said, "Yes, sir," before pressing the button. His eyes widened as the outer door slid open. He was instantly ejected into the vacuum of space. Chris Brooks struggled, realizing he had only seconds before he'd be incapacitated by the lack of atmosphere. His lungs would expand painfully, and he would freeze or suffocate in 15 seconds. I activated the comms. "Men overboard, number 2, starboard airlock." The alarm sounded immediately, and a crowd gathered at the airlock. Alan and Rebecca Morgan rushed over, followed by Amy. "Commander Victor, sir," I said, handing Alan a drive with video recording. "He confessed to sabotaging the weapon systems and having an affair with Lieutenant Jones. He tried to kill me. Understood?" Alan said. "We'll deal with this." Amy looked at me, her face pale. "You're going to explain this to me later, right?" I said quietly. "We'll talk when I'm ready." I turned and walked away, feeling something break inside me. As I looked out at the vastness of space, I realized the universe had a way of revealing truths, no matter how hard it was to face them. By the time Chris Brooks had been ejected, he was caught in an unstable orbit around Mars, complicating any chance of recovery. Amy turned to me, her face streaked with tears, and angrily accused, "You killed him, you idiot! I hate you!" "Enough," Lieutenant Allen intervened, guiding Amy toward the medical area. "Take her to sick bay and then hand her over to security," he instructed. With a serious tone, he faced me. "You're relieved from duty for the investigation. I'll handle this." "Yes, sir," I replied softly. "That's all," Allen commanded. "Everyone back to your posts. We've done all we can here." He turned to Commander Carson. "Once Emmy's settled, find her a berth far from the bridge. Get in touch with Mars Station about Commander Victor's recovery." "Understood, sir," Carson answered, walking away. Allen then addressed Alice. "Looks like you're stepping up, Alice. You're my new number 1 until further notice. Make sure bridge duties are adjusted accordingly. The mission is likely scrapped." "Yes, sir," Rebecca Morgan responded. "We've concluded our initial inquiry, sir. We need to review the findings in my quarters ASAP," Allen directed. "Got it, sir," Rebecca Morgan affirmed, then turned to me. "I'm sorry yet," she said. "You didn't deserve any of this." "Thanks, Commander," I muttered, heading to my quarters. I began sorting through Emmy's things, packing them into her duffel bag. I wanted her far away from me, likely reassigned to the vacant chief pilot's cabin. Security came to collect her belongings later. I didn't ask questions or care. I flipped the mattress, changing the stained bedding and tossing the old sheets into the laundry. With restricted access to my quarters, I sat at the computer console and submitted a divorce request citing infidelity. Since our marriage fell under JAG jurisdiction, the divorce process involved them. There was no property or children to divide, and with both of our incomes being equal, support wasn't necessary. It was a simple division. She kept hers, I kept mine. After submitting the paperwork, I awaited confirmation. Within 24 hours, 2 CIA agents from Hagen's contacted me, hinting at a vengeful motive. During the interrogation, the JAG officer made sure I didn't incriminate myself. I spent the following day on edge, avoiding interactions with the crew to dodge gossip. While in my quarters, Alan and Rebecca Morgan arrived unexpectedly, offering me a brief respite from the tension. Mars Station recovered Commander Victor's body and confiscated the illegal weapon found on him, Alan informed me. The CIU report confirms that your actions were in self-defense. Victor was at both sabotaged weapon stations, as shown in the tracking history logs. Right before Lieutenant Robinson noticed the calibration issue, Rebecca Morgan added. DNA samples from the blood match the commander's, and his confession to you verifies his involvement in the sabotage. Your wife claims she didn't know anything, but she's been detained as an accessory to Victor's plot. She might face conspiracy charges once we reach Earth. Said Richards. So we're heading back to Earth? I asked. Alan nodded. Yes, Ed. The mission is on hold for now. We'll face a board of inquiry when we return. Can I resume duty? I inquired. After some discussion, Houston approved it. With 2 officers down, we need you on bridge duty. Can you handle operations in gunnery? Alan asked, turning to Rebecca Morgan for confirmation. Yes, sir, Rebecca Morgan affirmed. Good, Alan said. We launch in 12 hours, so make sure you're rested and ready. Thank you, sir, I replied. May I speak with my wife? I need some answers. Are you sure, Ed? He asked. Absolutely, sir, I answered without hesitation. All right, Ed, but Commander Laura will accompany you. Do you agree, Alice? Hashover, Alice said. Good, he replied. Hashover? May I see the escort? Alice said. The guard approached and gestured at the discarded golem. We all looked around. Yes, sir, Rebecca Morgan responded. Very well, Alan concluded. Get to work and then rest up. It's time to earn your paycheck. Yes, sir, I replied. As Alan left, Rebecca Morgan turned to me. Ready, Lieutenant? She asked. I nodded. Yes, ma'am, I replied. Just so you know, Captain Simmons has commended you, Rebecca Morgan said. For what? I asked. Surprised, she teased. He believes your actions saved lives and prevented potential damage to the ship if Victor had used the weapon in the airlock, Rebecca Morgan explained. Damn, I muttered, taken aback. She smiled. Congrats. We reached the brig, checked in with the security officer on duty, and approached a small cell where Amy sat on the bed wearing an orange jumpsuit. What's up, Lieutenant? She sneered. So now it's just Lieutenant, not even E.T. or Lieutenant Jones, I remarked. Fine, prisoner. I've got a few questions and then I'm leaving, I replied. Go ahead, Lieutenant, she said, staring ahead, avoiding eye contact. How long were you involved with Victor? Since sophomore year at the academy, she replied. He was my counselor. I know, I responded. Where did it start? Do you really want to know? She challenged. Yeah, I do, I affirmed. All right, since you asked. I failed a test. He helped me cheat. I owed him, so I entertained him. I enjoyed it, so it kept happening, she confessed. So you cheated with him and betrayed me. That's it? I asked, feeling a wave of nausea. Yes, she admitted. You don't know how many times I thought of him when I was with you, and you know what? I liked it. You know what else? What? I asked, bracing myself. He's been places you couldn't reach. I felt sick. Surprised you could even feel me after him, she taunted. And you enjoyed working with him all those times we could, I added. It's not easy in low gravity, she explained. That's why we did it before and after missions. Did you ever love me, or was it all a lie? I asked. I loved you, she admitted. Well, I enjoyed being with him too. It was just sex, nothing more. You knew his plans once we boarded, didn't you? Yeah, I did. He wanted to stagger shifts so we wouldn't see each other much, but you found a way to talk to me, surprising both of us. So we decided to wait until Mars, she explained. And you were aware of the weapon sabotage? I knew he was up to something, but not exactly what. Just that he wanted to prevent your short leave. We didn't think you'd escalate it like this. And my supposed self-destruction was just a bonus, right? He blamed it on you? Was it? It was his idea, she stated, but you went along with it. You didn't stop him. No, I didn't, she admitted quietly. And I'm sorry. I never thought he'd actually do it. Bailed and you'll end up in jail. Was it worth it? It doesn't matter, she shrugged. I was proud of you, how you handled the ship. I loved you, but now I regret ever meeting you. I'll testify at your goodbye, I said. As I turned to leave, she called my name. I didn't look back. I raised my middle finger and walked away. Back on Earth, Amy was incarcerated in a federal prison for the investigation and court-martial. Crew members, including Alan, Alice, and I, gave testimony, enduring days of waiting for developments. My divorce was finalized in early April, with the JAG officer handling the paperwork. On Friday, April 18th, we gathered in the hearing room. Alan, Alice, and I sat together as Amy entered, shackled and flanked by armed guards. Council members, dressed in their decorated uniforms, joined the session. Admiral Cartwright, leading the council, initiated the proceedings. Please sit, he began. After summarizing the events of the Mars mission, he condemned Commander Victor for putting personal interests above duty, which endangered lives and damaged the ship. Turning to me, he acknowledged my role. Senior Lieutenant Ethan Matthews, he said, pausing before continuing. Your actions saved lives and prevented sabotage. We recommend you for the Advanced Operations School, starting June 1st. Thank you, sir, I said. The Admiral nodded and shifted to Alan. Captain Alan Simmons, he addressed. Alan stood attentively as the Admiral continued, acknowledging Alan's efforts despite the challenges. The Council affirms your command of the USS Armstrong, but notes an entry on your record. With the ship's modernization, a new crew assignment will be made. We recommend promoting Lieutenant Dr. Laura to Commander as your first officer. Expect new mission orders soon, the Admiral concluded. Thank you, Admiral, Alan responded. The Admiral then shifted his attention to Ami. Senior Lieutenant Amanda Carter, he began, addressing her by her maiden name post-divorce. She stood, facing the council, her head held high. This board expresses deep disappointment in your conduct. You have not only brought shame upon your ex-husband, but have also sullied the uniform you once wore, and the service to which you swore allegiance. Your involvement in these events, pun intended, may have put many lives at risk, including your ex-husband's. Your statements, coupled with those of Commander Victor, have led us to reassess your entire service record, including your time at the Academy. Victor's intervention ensured your passing a critical exam, without which you may never have earned your commission. While your piloting skills were exemplary, it's clear that you should not have been commissioned. Your association with Victor culminated in tragedy and endangered lives. Your actions no longer align with your position. He paused, his gaze unwavering. While we acknowledge your pending court-martial, this board has advised that your commission be revoked, your rank reduced to EARN, and your pay cut effective immediately, he declared, signaling the guards to escort her out. As Amy walked toward us, she stopped, tears streaming down her face. Et, she whispered, her voice breaking. Address me with respect, I shot back coldly. She stood taller, though the tears continued to fall. I request to address you as Lieutenant, she began, but I cut her off. Get her out of my sight, I ordered, and the guards quickly moved in, escorting her away as she sobbed. Her words had no weight anymore. A full report of the Council's decisions will be sent to each of you and added to your records, Admiral Samuel said, bringing the session to a close. This session is adjourned. We rose and filed out as the Council members departed. Afterward, Alan turned to me, a small smile on his face. "Well, that wasn't too bad," he said. "How about a drink?" "I could use one," I agreed. "I think it went rather well, sir," Rebecca Morgan added with a smile. "Why not?" I agreed. And we made our way to the Officers' Club to enjoy our moment of triumph. Standing at the airlock of Galileo Station, orbiting Mars's dark side, I found myself reflecting on the past 17 months. Amy's court-martial had concluded a month before I entered the School of Advanced Spacecraft Management. I had testified for the prosecution, though recalling the events with her and Chris Brooks aboard the Armstrong was still a painful memory. This time, Amy was a different person, wearing a crewman's uniform without wings. She had lost weight, her eyes hollow with regret. She had lost everything, her rank, her wings, and our marriage. Her career was in ruins, and her record would forever carry the mark of disgrace, barring her from ever piloting again. Monk up. As the court convened, we rose until the judge instructed us to sit. The verdict came swiftly. Amy was found guilty as an accessory to my attempted murder but was acquitted of conspiracy. The defense argued there was no direct evidence tying her to the conspiracy, but it was clear she knew about Victor's plan to eject me into space, and did nothing to stop it. She was sentenced to 10 years of hard labor in federal prison, followed by a dishonorable discharge. The gavel fell, and the case was closed. Amy left in chains, her face cold, never once meeting my eyes. I moved on, attending my class in Florida near Cape Canaveral. The training was a welcome distraction, made all the better by the pleasant weather and scenery. There was a lot to appreciate, including the ample sunlight and open skies. After 18 months, I graduated, was promoted to lieutenant commander, and received orders to Galileo, a remote station orbiting Mars. The station's isolation piqued my curiosity, especially since it wasn't as visible as Mars Station. What lay ahead intrigued me. Upon arrival, I was greeted by Captain Hawkins, a striking officer with a confident smile. She briefed me on the situation and assured me the transition would be smooth. "Ready to see your new home for the next few years?" she asked, leading me to the observation deck. She pressed a button, and the massive silhouette of a ship appeared. It was the USS Enterprise, sleek and powerful. "This will be your domain as my operations officer. Ready for an adventure?" "Absolutely, Captain," I responded, a grin forming on my face. "We launch in 15 days. I'll assign you daily briefings," she continued. "Welcome aboard, Commander," she said, shaking my hand firmly before departing. I watched the Enterprise gleam under the station lights, a wave of excitement rushing through me. This was my new chapter, and I was ready.